الحمد لله الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. As to what proceeds, for those of you who are attending online, I greet you all with the Islamic greeting of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As many of you will be aware that with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we shall be starting a new book to study. Recently, when I visited our Shaykh Wasi'ullah Abbas in the month of Ramadan in Mecca, I had a discussion with the Shaykh with regards to what was being witnessed in the West. When the da'wah of al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah reached the West in the 90s, the three great scholars of the Sunnah, and it would not be an exaggeration if you were to say that they were the imams of their times. Shaykh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani, Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, and Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala. The da'wah reached the West, and the da'wah was to call to the kitab and the sunnah of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If you speak to those brothers and sisters who will now be elderly in age, they will tell you that these three sheikhs, and if you were to add the fourth, it would be justice. That is Shaykh Muqbil ibn Hadi al-Wadi rahimahullah ta'ala. These four sheikhs, that which distinguished their da'wah is that they called to the revival of following the book of Allah and the sunnah of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In their writings, in their speeches, in their teaching. And this is how the da'wah was. الدعوة السلفية, the Salafi da'wah, was a da'wah which was known to call to the book of Allah and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, aqidatan, manhajan wa fiqhan. Then, in the past few years, we have seen a lot of confusion amongst the people who ascribe and adhere themselves to the Salafi da'wah with regards to adhering and ascribing to a fiqh madhhab and studying a fiqh madhhab. Many people they say that those who call to the book of Allah and the Sunnah of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wage war against madhabs. When I say madhab, I refer to fiqh madhab, like the Hanafiya, the Malikiya, the Shafi'iyya, and the Hanabila. And this is injustice, because the position of a Muslim is that if the scholars of the past strived and worked hard and they benefited the Muslim Ummah, then there is no blame upon benefiting from their works. The blame is when you defend their mistakes and you become a fanatic. And recently, especially in the West, as we all know that in the UK, many of our grandparents, they migrated from the subcontinent in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the madhab that is followed in the subcontinent usually is the Hanafi madhab. Most of the people in the UK, or most of the Muslims in the UK, or the majority, are adherents of the, or blind followers of the Hanafi madhab, the muqallidun of the Hanafi madhab. Then we had a few blind followers of the Shafi'i madhab. And then we had a few from the Maliki madhab, like the Algerians and the Libyans, or those who came from Africa. But in a very low percentage. Never did I ever hear in the UK that there were Hanabila. Because in order for you to be a blind follower of a madhab depended where you were born geographically. So if you were born in the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, then you were Hanafi. If you were born in China, you were Hanafi. If you were born in Africa, different places in Africa, then you are probably Maliki. If you were born in certain parts of the world, then you were a Shafi'i. The Hanabila or the Hanbalis were usually in parts of Syria and Saudi Arabia. And as time went by, now in 2022, 2023, many graduates who graduated from the Islamic University of Medina have now started to call to this madhab fanaticism, compelling the people to study and adhere to a madhab. وَمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ بِهَا مِن سُلْطَانٍ. And it is for this reason that the people should know that just like there is a madhab which is known as Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali, there is also a madhab that has existed from the beginning of time, known as the madhab of the people of Hadith, Ahlul Hadith, who follow the Quran and the Sunnah. In fact, it would not be injustice to say that the Imams such as Malik, Shafi, and Ahmad were all from the madhab. They all were adherents and followers of the madhab of the people of Hadith. Madhabs which have been founded by their names. So there was a need for those who make this propaganda and say that there is no such thing as a madhab. The madhab are only four. And there is no such thing as Ahlul Hadith, those who follow the narrations, or those who follow the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they are new, they do not exist, and all these doubts that are floating amongst the people. And this is something which is not new. And it is for this reason that after consulting the people of knowledge, they recommended that this book be studied, which was written by a scholar from Azerbaijan, Shaykh al-Masumi, rahimahullah ta'ala. And I believe that this book, all the arguments that are being presented now by those who are promoting and propagating and calling to madhhabs or the fanaticism of madhhabs, then this book has the answers to all those questions. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So we shall be studying this book, Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And we shall study the background of the book, of why this book was illustrated by the Shaykh. The Shaykh was from Azerbaijan, or something which is known as Ma Wara an-Nahr. And we shall read. But before we start, I would like to advise the brothers and sisters that they should refine and rectify their intention. For the purpose of why we are seeking knowledge is that seeking knowledge, talabul ilm, is an act of ibadah. And this act of ibadah, we are doing so that we get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first reason is that we remove the ignorance within ourselves. Raf'ul jahal. The ignorance, or the jahl, the jahl that we have, the ignorance that we have should be removed. And all these questions, and a lot of these discussions that are happening amongst many brothers and sisters, and bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, in this book, you will find the answers. And it is an amazing text. So the first thing is, we must have ikhlas, sincerity. We are not learning this knowledge to defame or to humiliate or to win debates or arguments. Rather, we are seeking this knowledge to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if there are any doubts that can be found within ourselves, then for these doubts to be removed. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. This was the first thing that I wanted to mention. So we shall start this book. The title of this book is Halil Muslimu Mulzamun Bittiba'i Madhhabi Mu'ayyan. Should a Muslim follow a particular madhhab? In other words, should a Muslim be a Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, or a Hanbali? This is the title of the book. But this title was not the title that was given by the Shaykh. The Shaykh who wrote this book, who is from Azerbaijan, he called this illustration Hadiyatul Sultan ila Muslimi Bilad al-Yaban. A gift from Sultan. Sultan was his name. To the Muslims who live in Japan. So it seems that this book was illustrated by some Muslims or some reverts who had accepted Islam in Japan, and they were confused with regards to the issues of madhhab. So then the Shaykh, he wrote for them this illustration that is before us. So this is something which we need to know about the title of this book. Should a Muslim follow a particular madhhab? The person who decided to give this title was somebody who studied with Shaykh Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, Muhammad Eid Abbasi. He's the one who gave this title to this book called Hal al-Muslimu mulzamun bittiba'i madhhabi muayyan. Should a Muslim follow a particular madhhab? The word ittiba was used. That which was befitting for this title was to use the word taqleed instead of the word ittiba. So, هل المسلم ملزم بتقليد مذهب معين? Because there is a difference between ittiba and taqleed, as we shall study. But ittiba here has been used in its linguistic sense and not in its technical sense. Because we shall study what the word ittiba means technically. So that which was ansab or afdal with regards to giving the title which Shaykh Muhammad Eid Abbasi gave was هل المسلم ملزم بتقليد مذهب معين? Should a Muslim blindly follow a particular madhhab? Because the argument is about taqleed, blind following. Now, so we shall start the book. With regards to any book that you read, some guidelines of how a student of knowledge should start to read a book. When you buy a book, or if you are given a book as a gift, the first thing that you should do is read the biography of the scholar. First thing that you should do is read the biography of the scholar. Then, number two, you should read the introduction, the muqaddimah, written by the scholar. Number three is, if you don't read the book from page to page and cover to cover, then you read the conclusion of the book after reading the introduction, not before the introduction. After reading the introduction, you read the conclusion. And then if there is a contents page, you go through the whole contents of the book. That will give you a bird's eye view of the book if you don't read the book from cover to cover, page to page, or from the beginning till the end. And this is something which is very important. So, as following this methodology, we will read the introduction and we will read the biography of the Shaykh today. Bi-idhnillah ta'ala. Who was this author? Who was this author? What was his name? Where was he from? Etc. Before we do that, there's a few points I would like to mention. The first point is, we live in a time now where there is a lot of discussions taking place amongst many people with regards to blind following and the ikhtilafat, or the differing that can be found, or the different positions that can be found with regards to madhhabs or scholars. And there is no doubt that fanaticism, or as they call it, at-ta'assub al-madhhabi, having fanaticism or exaggerating or blindly following a scholar or a particular madhhab unanimously without any dispute is considered to be from amongst the downfall issues of the Muslimin and the downfall of the Muslims and a reason of their backwardness. Because becoming fanatic leads to blindly following, and blindly following shuts the brain. What does blind following do? It shuts the brain. Because a blind follower does not think and contemplate with his brain, but rather he relies upon the thinking and the contemplation of the brains of others. And it is for this reason that we find the imams and the students, they never ever compelled anybody to take their positions, and they never ever called to fanaticism. But those who claim to love these imams and follow them and ascribe themselves to them, they have forgotten what these great imams stated about their positions. If they were contrary, or if they were debatable, of whether they should stick to their positions or they should abandon them. But the shaitan, he comes in between the people, and he creates this hatred and animosity between the Muslims. And because of this, the Muslims are divided. And due to this division and this disunity, the Muslim Ummah has become weak. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said to us, "Addu alayha bin nawajid," that hold on to the Sunnah with your molar teeth. But these people, they hold on to the statements of the imams and the scholars with the molar teeth, rather than holding the Sunnah. And this is something which is very sad. So this is the reality that we live in. And there is no doubt the fanaticism and the bigoted partisanship, at-ta'assub al-madhhabi, that can be found within the fiqh madhhabs is at a greater level than the fanaticism that can be found for different scholars. We have the scales upon which we weigh the opinions and the positions of all the people of knowledge, including ours. and the one whose position conforms to the Sunnah, his position is accepted, and the one whose position is contrary to the Sunnah is rejected. And this should be known to the brothers and sisters. Now, perhaps if we can have somebody who can read the biography of the scholar.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
طيب, I will read myself, inshallah.
You don't have the book.
Don't have the book?
No.
طيب, I think there is a PDF copy.
If we had the book, we would
Read, inshallah.
I thought you asked online.
No,
So,
ask online.
stop.
No.
Take the book, Hadith, and read it.
طيب.
I'll bring you more.
There is a PDF for it.
Just take 2 photos of your book.
We'll have our brother Abu Zainab read.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, with regards to the biography of the author, I'll start reading from the book now, the English translation. So about the author, Abu Abdurrahman Muhammad Sultan al-Ma'sumi was born in 1297 after Hijrah into a noble and wealthy family in Khajnada, a town of Azerbaijan. He began his studies by reading the books and treatises written in the Turkish language, the language of the people of his land. Then he began to study the works in Arabic, such as those of al-Awza'i, al-Zanjani, the Awamin of al-Jarmani, the Kafiya of Ibn al-Hajib. He then started studying the books of logic and philosophy, such as Musallam al-Ulum, Hikmat al-Ayn, and Isharat of Ibn Sina. After that, he advanced to study the books of Aqidah, such as Al-Nasafiyya, Al-Awdiyya, Al-Tahawiyya, Jawarat al-Tawhid,
Jawhar al-Tawheed.
Jawhar al-Tawhid, Al-Sanusiyya, etc.
Hasbuk. Now, so with regards to the author, then he is Abu Abdurrahman. That which is correct is that he is Abu Abdul Karim, not Abu Abdurrahman. Abu Abdul Karim Muhammad Sultan Ibn Abdullah Muhammad Oran bin Muhammad Mir Sayyid Ibn Abdurrahim Ibn Abdullah Ibn Abdul Latif Ibn Muhammad Ma'soom al-Mashhur bil-Ma'soomi al-Khujandi. So that which is correct is that he is Abu Abdul Karim, not Abu Abdurrahman. Muhammad Sultan, famously known as al-Ma'soomi. al-Khujandi. He is known as Ma'sumi, which is an ascription of his great grandfather known as Muhammad Ma'sum. And Khujanda, as he is known as al-Khujandi, is a town in Azerbaijan, where the Shaykh rahimahullah was from. The Shaykh was born in the year 1297 after Hijrah. He was born into a family which was known for ilm, adab, and nobility. And he first learned how to read with his parents. Read and writing, al-qira'a wal-khat. And this is the way of the people of knowledge, that they teach their children to seek knowledge at an early age. That which is apparent is that the Shaykh spoke Turkish. So his elementary studies were in the Turkish language, meaning the Turkish language was used as a medium, just like we have in the subcontinent, that they use Urdu as a medium. So they teach the books in Arabic, but the medium that is used is Urdu. So the medium that was used for the Shaykh, because of him speaking Turkish, was the Turkish language, which was the language of the people of his land. So in Azerbaijan they speak Turkish. No. Then the Shaykh he started to learn books of the Arabic language. When you read the biographies of all the scholars, you will see that they have a similar pattern. The pattern is always the same. You will never, I have not come across a scholar whose path of seeking knowledge was different from the other scholars. And logically and rationally this makes sense. The Arabic language is the key to all the different sciences. Without the key, you cannot open the door. So the first thing that you have to obtain is what? What's the first thing that you need to obtain in order to be able to look at the doors and even think about opening them? The key. So the first thing that you start to seek knowledge is the Arabic language. Starting with reading and writing and learning how to read the Quran, and then studying the books of the Arabic language. So these are some of the books that were mentioned. Sharamiyat Amil of al-Jurjani, Kafiya of Ibn al-Hajib. These are books of the Arabic language. So a student of knowledge builds his level of aptitude by learning and seeking knowledge, that which is most beneficial for him. And that is the Arabic language, starting with the Arabic language. And this is what Al-Masumi, rahimahullah, did. That's why when you enroll in any institution to go and seek knowledge, Qasim, the first thing that they will teach you is the Arabic language. Once you have mastered the Arabic language, then you can progress and learn whatever you want, whatever interests you. Without the Arabic language, you will be a person who will be lost. So Masumi, rahimahullah, he started mastering and learning the books of the Arabic language, Nahwa, Sarf, syntax, etymology, and all the other different areas of the Arabic language. Then he started to study the books of logic and philosophy, Mantiq and al-Falsafa. And this seems to be the norm from where he was from. It shows that Al-Ma'sumi was not upon the way of al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Because the people of Bid'ah, the heretics, are those who engage and learn mantiq and falsafa and master it. And this is what Masumi did, because he was from that culture. He was from that background. He lived in the bi'ah, or in the surroundings, or the environment that he came from. Until this day, you find this not so much in the UK now, and the reason why they have removed the books of Mantiq and Falsafa in the UK, in many of these Darul Ulooms and institutes that you have, is because the standards of the students is so low. The students, they can't get their heads around these subjects. I remember when I was studying in India, and I studied Mantiq and Ilm al-Kalam before I became Salafi, and we asked our teacher who taught us this, that what is al-Mantiq and Ilm al-Kalam? We were sitting with him once. Can you tell us what these two disciplines? So Mantiq is logical arguments, rational arguments. Ilm al-Kalam is when you get into arguments, hypothetical arguments, and debate with philosophy. And he said nothing. He said to us, al-Mantiq and Ilm al-Kalam is nothing. He said it's all a waste of time. He goes, you go in through one door, and you come out all confused from another door. This is al-Mantiq and this is Mantiq and Ilm al-Kalam. No benefit. So the Shaykh, he studied mantiq and falsafa, like Salam al-Ulum and Shar al-Qadi Mubarak and Hikmatul Ain and its Ashar and Isharatul Ra'is of Ibn Sina. So first, he studied logic, al-Ilm al-Kalam and falsafa. Then he studied the books of Aqeedah. For example, like An-Nasafiyya, which is the books of the Maturidis. And then Jawhar al-Tawheed and Sanusiyya. These are all books of the Ash'ari and Maturidiyya. So it seems that this is what was spread in Azerbaijan at that time. Which was spread in Azerbaijan at that time, that there were scholars of philosophy, there were scholars of Kalam, and there were scholars of Maturidi and Ash'ari Aqeedah. It seems that al-Sunnah were extinct in that area. Wallahu a'lam. Or there were probably very few in number. Now, so, now, yeah, Abu Zainab, read.
At the age of 23, Shaykh al-Ma'sumi openly denounced the blind following of madhhab, the schools of religious laws or sects, and exposed the contradictions and disobedience of blind followers to their imams. This won for him the displeasure and fury of many. Consequently, he left his native land in 1323 after Hijrah with the intention of traveling to Hijaz.
Now, so after studying all these, the Arabic language and the norm that was studied in the institutes of at that time, Ma'sumi had mastered all the different sciences. Then, at the age of 23, when he was 23 years old, after thorough research, Ma'sumi denounced the blind following of the madhhab. He said that this notion or belief that you have to stick and blindly follow a madhhab, he says this is wrong. And he denounced. He denounced the fanaticism and the blind following that was present in his time amongst his people. But he just didn't make a claim and stay quiet. He backed up his claim by exposing the contradictions. And disobedience of the blind followers to the Imams. He said, you claim that you love Abu Hanifa. Well, Abu Hanifa says this, yet you contradict what he says and you fanatically do the opposite. And this is what happens. What we can learn from Ma'sumi's life is that it takes a brave man to go public and speak the truth, especially when he knows that he is totally outnumbered, that he is a minority within a minority. And this requires courage. This requires thabat and istiqamah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we find that our scholars of the past, all of them, they had these qualities of when they came across the truth and the truth became apparent and clear to them, they were not scared to speak about it and to call to it and to defend it, and at the same time refute the batil. And this is what the Shaykh did. So when he started to do this, this is going to displease many. You're going to make more enemies than friends. And this is what happened. And subhanAllah, I have noticed this from the time of the Salaf to the Khalaf, that whenever a scholar lived in a particular territory or region, and all the people, they opposed him, they made trouble for him, then the scholar would at the beginning confront them and be steadfast. And when he saw, and when he would see that the opposition is great, then he would migrate from that land, move away from it to some other place where he could establish his da'wah and then come back and give da'wah to his people. And you'll find this pattern amongst many scholars. Read the biographies and you'll always find this. And this is what Masumi did. When he saw that he left his native land, Azerbaijan. He left Azerbaijan in 1323, and he decided to make his direction or turn towards Al-Hijaz. Al-Hijaz meaning Makkah and Medina. So he left Azerbaijan when he saw that the opposition was great in number. He decided to migrate to Makkah and Medina. Now,
and Maksumi traveled by train and ship. In Turkey, he met Sultan al-Hamid, and what he happened to see in the capital of the Ottoman Caliphate deeply disturbed him. Finally, he arrived at Mecca on the 8th of Zulfiker, 1323 after Hijrah.
now, so what happened is that when a scholar migrates, makes hijrah, he migrates with whatever means are at his disposal. So he traveled by train, by ship, and he arrived in Turkey and he met the Ottoman leader, Sultan Abdul Hamid. The Ottoman Empire as we know that the word that has been used here is the Ottoman Caliphate. And as we know that the Ottoman Empire was based upon the system of kingship. Just as we have now kingship in Saudi Arabia, kingship in different countries. So therefore, to call it a caliphate or a khilafah, fihi nadhar. That's why it's better to say ad-dawlatul Uthmani. Just like Saudi Arabia is not a caliphate, it's a kingship. Prophet ﷺ said that there will be rule of the Khilafah, Khulafa al-Rashideen, and then he said that kingship will prevail in my ummah. But if what is intended by al-Khilafah here is ruleship, then la ba'sa bih. But a lot of the people, we need to make a distinction that many of us know that you have Uthman bin Erdogan. Yes, is it? What's his name? Was his name Erdogan? What's the name of the famous series that they have made? Ertugrul. Uthman ibn Ertugrul. Yes, not Erdogan. Erdogan is the current. So we know that the lineage of the Ottomans comes through Uthman. That's why they are called Uthmaniyya. Just like the Saudis are called Saudi due to Muhammad ibn Saud from his lineage. So therefore, to call it a caliphate, fihi nadar, but to say ad-dawlatul Uthmaniyya is more accurate and more precise, because a khilafah is something which is not based upon kingship. Khilafah is based upon Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd, who choose a Muslim ruler amongst them to rule amongst them, who they see to be the most pious, the most muttaqi, just as it was done during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidi. So what actually happened? What made al-Ma'sumi disturbed in Turkey? They mentioned here in English, but they didn't mention the story of what actually happened. But I'll tell you the story. So the text for the Maturidi Aqidah is known as An-Nasafiyya, Shar'a Qaid An-Nasafiyya. In this text, it is written in the text of the Maturidis that the Muslim leader must be from the Quraysh. Must be from the Quraysh. Based upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, al-a'immatu min Quraysh. Now, this text was widespread in Turkey because the Turks were Maturidis in Aqid. But when Sultan Abdul Hamid got this text printed, he got this deleted, erased, because the Turks are not from the Quraysh. The Turks are not from the Quraysh. So when Ma'sumi reached Turkey and when he went back to the book Shar'a Qaid of An-Nasafiyya, he opened, and when he started to read, because he had already studied this earlier, he found this missing. So he was wiped out, not disturbed. Although that which is sahih with regards to the understanding of this hadith, al-a'immatu min Quraysh, is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned this, he said that the people of Quraysh are people of leadership. It is better to have a ruler from amongst the Quraysh. But does not negate the fact that if somebody is not from the Quraysh, he cannot be a leader. Meaning that the legitimacy of the Ottomans would be at question. That wasn't the case, but this is what they pre-assumed and thought. This was because this hadith, al-a'immatu min Quraysh, up until the Ottomans came into power, all the rulers that came had some form of link with the Quraysh. Either being from Banu Umayyah or being from Banu Abbas. The Ottomans were the first non-Arabs who actually Allah granted them to rule amongst the Muslims who are not Arabs. So this is what disturbed Ma'sumi when he came and when he saw this, and he said, hey, what's going on? How come this is... I remember reading this narration. Obviously, when Nasafi wrote this, Nasafi was from the older generation before the Turks, before the Ottomans. So this is what happened when he said that something deeply disturbed him. Qasim, something deeply disturbed. Then finally he arrived at Makkah on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, 1323. Now,
He performed Hajj and visited some of the scholars of the Hijaz, including Shaykh Shu'aib ibn Abdul Rahman al-Maghribi al-Maliki, with whom he studied Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Muwatta, and Mishkat al-Masabih. The Shaykh gave him permission to narrate from him.
Now, so it seems that the reason why he decided to migrate or make hijrah to Hijaz is that in Hijaz there was ihtimam, or there was importance of studying the books of ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it seemed that Ma'sumi had grown an interest of studying the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by himself. That is which led him to denounce blindly following madhhabs. And this is what he did. So he read the books of hadith to these scholars, and they gave him and granted him an ijazah. Now,
Al-Ma'sumi also met Shaykh Salih Kamal al-Hanafi, Shaykh Muhammad Murad al-Ramzi al-Qazani, Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id Babsil al-Shafi'i, Shaykh Ahmad al-Hadraw, and others. Most of them were Sufi Shaykh, and he was impressed by them and gave his pledge of allegiance to Shaykh Muhammad Ma'sum bin Abdul Rashid al-Mujaddidi
Naqshbandi, now.
al-Naqshbandi. He taught him the Sufi practices and ordered him to visualize the Shaykh whilst making dhikr.
Now, so Ma'sumi rahimahullah ta'ala, when he came to Hijaz, he found one thing that he was looking for, and that was to study the narrations and the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then in Mecca and Medina during that time, there was a strong presence of Sufism. And when a person sees Sufism, not the Sufism that what we see now on social media, but the Sufism which is a mild version of Sufism. You know, when you go to buy peri-peri chicken, you have mild, hot, very hot. Yes? So in the very same way with Sufism, you have these different flavors. So when he went there, he saw this tasawwuf, this Sufism. And this Sufism was all about self-discipline. You know, the Sufi, these mild Sufis, they were punctual in their adhkar and adab and respecting the elders and doing all sorts. So this impressed Ma'sumi because he knew that we all believe, even al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah believe that tazkiyatun nafs, purification of the soul, is from the important matters of the deen. But how the soul is purified is where we dispute with the Sufis. They implement and introduce crazy things. Whereas we say that the tazkiyatun nafs, the purification of the soul, or the purification of your batin, is done through the kitab and the sunnah. So, what do we mean by kitab and the sunnah? We say that all the adhkar and the ad'iyah that have been mentioned in the sunnah must be followed. Whereas the Sufis, they introduce their own adhkar and own ad'iyah, changing the wordings and doing them in different numbers, in congregation, in a loud voice, etc. So this is where we differ from them. So Ma'sumi, he saw that this was the norm there. And he was impressed of what he saw of the discipline. So he gave bay'ah to this Sufi Shaykh. And this Sufi Shaykh, he taught him all the Sufi practices. So this showed that Ma'sumi, as earlier we learned, that he had mastered al-mantiq, ilm al-kalam and falsafa. Again here, he mastered Sufism. Until he reached a level where his Shaykh ordered him to visualize him whilst making dhikr. And this is what the Sufis do. For those who have had any experiences with the Sufis, when you reach to a certain level, Sufis tell you, when you make dhikr with Allah, think of me, visualize me. Then he was granted khilafah. Naam. So, naam, read. Tafaddal ya Abu Zaynab.
He then gave him permission to train followers, but the heart of al-Ma'sumi was not content. He therefore began to study the sources of tafsir in the Sunnah and their explanations. To his dismay, al-Ma'sumi observed the 4 separate places of prayer around the Kaaba, and he would see the followers of a particular madhhab refusing to perform prayer behind the followers of other madhhab. Instead of, they would sit among the rows of people waiting for the jama'ah of their own madhhab.
So, Ma'sumi dwelled into Sufism deeply until he was given khilafah. What do they call it? Khilafah. Khilafah is not the khilafah of the rule. This term khilafah is a term where the Sufi master accredits his disciple, of what we would say in other words, like knights him or accredits him, authorizes him, and he's considered to be the Khalifa of the Shaykh. So basically he has now the same power and authority where people can come and give him bay'ah and he can prescribe and guide others. So Ma'sumi reached this level, and this level, it requires, with the very hot Sufis, when we have mild, hot, very hot, a long period of time. With the mild Sufis, then maybe it's easy as going to the bakery and buying some cupcakes and getting the khilafah. Maybe some Sufi Shaykh, if he knows that you have a villa in Miami and drive a Lamborghini, maybe within a week you can get the khilafah. But with the serious, very hot Sufis, this requires, you have to prove yourself, your adhkar, your ibadah, you get tested at all levels. And this is what happened, that Ma'sumi, he clocked all the levels and was given the ijazah or the certificate or the khilaf. But the heart of al-Ma'sumi was not content. Why? Because he was a person who was very attentive with regards to the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he must have seen that the practices of the Sufis contradicted the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when he was not content, he decided to further his studies, and he began to study the sources of tafsir and the Sunnah and the explanations. But one thing that disturbed Ma'sumi was the 4 musallas that were present in Mecca. So you had a place just for the Hanafis. and then you had a place just for the Malikis, and a place just for the Shafi'is, and a place just for the Hanbalis. So if you went for Umrah and you were a Hanafi, you would only pray behind the Hanafi Imam. So if you were a Shafi, he'd be sitting and waiting till his Imam gets up. So it was like the Muslim Ummah was divided into four. When I was researching on this issue, the most problematic area or time of these four different musallas that represented four different madhhabs, which was a result of fanaticism, was at the time of Maghrib. So the Hanafi would start with the Hanafi Imam, and the Shafi'i Imam would say Allahu Akbar, and he would go into ruku, and the Hanafi would still be praying. So there was confusion of voices. So there was chaos. If you went at Maghrib time, you'd see people doing crazy stuff. Somebody's going into ruku, somebody's going into sujood, because of the voices. When Ma'sumi saw this, that we have one book, we have one messenger, we have one sunnah, then why are we divided into four? These four musallas where the Shafi'i would refuse to pray behind the Hanafi, and the Hanafi would refuse to pray behind the Shafi'i. This disturbed him. And he contemplated and he thought, what is this? How can this be Islam? Surely this is not what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would have wanted. Two people claiming to be Muslims, but one refuses to pray behind the other. Now, and this disturbed Ma'sum. Now,
after living there for 3 years, he visited the Prophet's mosque and met the scholars of Al-Madinah. Among them were Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadumi al-Hanbali and Shaykh Ahmad al-Barzanji. All of them gave him permission to narrate from them and wrote their change of narration for him.
now, so Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam's masjid, Al-Madinah, during that time was a center place, was the center of learning a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he has been like that till this day. So he went there, and once again he studied a hadith with the muhaddithun of Medina. Now, again, this study of hadith strengthened him to know that he had to take the path of the people of hadith. So this was the second time now that he had studied hadith with the scholars of hadith. Now,
then Al-Ma'sumi traveled to Syria, and in Damascus he met great scholars including Shaykh Badruddin Yusuf al-Ma'mar, the Muhaddith, Shaykh Abdul Hakim al-Kandahari, Shaykh Abdul Khayd ibn Abidi, and others. All of them gave him permission to narrate from them.
again, he traveled to Syria to meet the scholars of hadith there. Again, that had a great impact upon his life. Now,
in Damascus, Al-Ma'sumi criticized the Sufi Shaykh for their involvement in music, dancing, and the use of flute and tambourine. He also criticized the Rif'iyya al-Bid'iyya for their dhikr movements.
now, so then the very hot Sufis, in terms of their exaggeration, came. So as we know that the Sufis of Syria, in comparison to many of the Sufis in India, they believe that music is permissible when it comes to dhikr. I'm pretty sure that you, having social media, must have seen some crazy things on social media when it comes to the Sufis and music and how they make dhikr. So this shows that al-Ma'sumi turned away from Sufism. He turned away from the Sufism, and he saw that Sufism had many flaws and was problematic. Especially when he saw the Sufis making dhikr and dancing and doing all these things with music. He started to criticize them openly. Now,
then he departed for Beirut and met Shaykh Abdurrahman bin Darwish al-Hud and Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani.
now, Yusuf al-Nabahani was a big Sufi. Now,
Then he visited Al-Aqsa Mosque and then traveled to Egypt. At Al-Azhar University, he met Shaykh Muhammad Bakhit al-Mutiri and Shaykh Muhammad Rashid Rida. He helped with Al-Manar magazine and brought all of its back issues and the works of Shaykh Muhammad Abduhu and
Muhammad Abdu.
Muhammad Abdu.
Now,
And likewise what had been printed from the works of Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He eventually bought 1,000 books in total, excluding smaller treatises and magazines.
this is what he did. So he met Muhammad Bakhit al-Mut'i, one of the Salafi Sheikhs, and he met Rashid Rida, he met Muhammad Abdu. Then Muhammad Abdu is a problematic person. People have written articles that he had links with Freemasons, wallahu a'lam. And from the works of Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim. So he bought 1,000 books in total. So you can imagine, he just went there and probably bought everything that his hands must have reached. And he bought everything that he could bring back from Egypt. At that time, Egypt was the center place for printing books. A lot of books of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Qayyim are printed in Egypt. So he brought them all back. Khalas, we'll stop here bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum, inshallah. Make a note of where we stopped here. Now, any questions before?
The Christians about the Sufis, these the mild version of Sufis, would you describe them as Zuhad, being ascets, or what is it?
It depends. The Sufis at the very early part of the emergence were very different from even the mild Sufis. So now some of them did start with the premise of zuhd and raqaiq and all these other issues. So it's very difficult for you to categorize all the Sufis into one single category. Some had less bid'ah, whereas others had more bid'ah. Some clearly had kufr and shirk. Some left the fold of al-Islam. So it all depends. But now, some of them had a zuhd. Zuhd was important, but then again, it all goes of how they understood az-zuhd. We have the Salaf that wrote books on zuhd. There's a book, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, which is called Kitab al-Zuhd. How was the understanding of zuhd? Was it exaggerated? Does zuhd mean that you give up all the luxuries of this dunya and everything? This is how zuhd is defined? This is the question. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah was asked once, what is zuhd? He said, zuhd is that which, your zuhd is something which the people cannot see. Not that you manifest it to the people. So this was all it fluctuated. In certain areas, there was different types of zuhud, there was different types of how they practiced, how they understood, and in other places it was much worse. So it would be hard to say, but naam, they did have the asal, or the premise was to practice zuhud and raqa'iq and tazkiyatun nafs and all these other things. That's why till this day the Sufis themselves are not united upon what is Sufism. There is no one single universal definition of Sufism. In fact, once I was reading, somebody said there's over 1,000 definitions. Nobody agreed what is Sufism. No. But there is no doubt that the Sufis of today are khurafiyun, and they have bid'ah and they shirk and kufr and everything. No.
Was al-Ashab Salafi at the time?
No. But they were always Salafi ulama that were there. So we'll stop here. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.